Listeners, forgiveness is often spoken of as something we do for others, but its deepest work happens quietly in small ways. It's the soft release of what we can carry, whether it be the stories, the shame, the moments we wish we could undo. Today, we are exploring forgiveness not as a demand or a destination, but as a sacred path back to wholeness. Welcome to Sacred Harmony, a space devoted to healing, inner alignment, and the gentle restoration of the heart. I'm your host, Pragya, and today I am joined by Shannon Curtis, who is the founder of Angel Goddess Healing, an intuitive coach and author who supports people in healing trauma, releasing addictive patterns, and deepening their connection with their higher selves. Her work invites compassion, courage, and a return to the inner child longing to feel safe and safe. In this episode, we're exploring forgiveness of self and of others and how it becomes a gateway to peace, freedom, and deeper harmony within. And with that, I welcome you on the podcast, Shannon. It is such an honor to host you today.
Thank you so much for having me today, and it's an honor for me to be a guest on your show.
That's great. And to set a context or, just a warm up question, I'd love to begin gently. What first taught you that forgiveness was not about excusing pain, but about reclaiming your own inner peace? And how did you realize that, okay, this is not something that you just give out for other people, but you do it for yourself? So,
I think I realized during my life that there's not a lot of people teaching how to forgive. I think it's a concept that we hear a lot to forgive, to forgive. We have the Bible that tells us to forgive, but I never had this real understanding of the why. And so once I went into my own trauma and my own therapy and my own help, I realized that forgiveness was so much bigger than I realized before. And so I always say forgiveness is about forgiving your pain back to that perpetrator, back to that person who hurt you. And forgiveness is forgetting back your power. And forgetting is forgetting back your power. And so that's really what happened to me on my journey as I walked my path and I was molested when I was 4. And once I found forgiveness, true forgiveness from my perpetrator, it really came from the place of understanding what it meant. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about now and came up with a forgiveness method that I teach people and teach my clients with and do workshops and retreats because I just feel like it's something that we don't really understand. And then it's the other thing is I tell people I do it because it is the most selfish thing I can do for myself. It's really, really not about the other person. And I think that's where we have it backwards, that it's about ourselves.
that is beautiful. And thank you for that because that makes so much sense, and I totally resonate with that because all of the time is whenever there is a certain situation where you're like, okay, there is a position like of yourself being in the position where you have to forgive, and the first thing that any elder or anybody who you reach out to would tell you is that it is not for them but probably just for you. So thank you for that, because a lot of times we don't understand why it is for us and not for them. And with that, many people believe forgiveness means forgetting or minimizing harm or reopening wounds. So, from your perspective, I want to know what is most misunderstood about forgiveness and what are the misconceptions regarding this?
I think one of the big misconceptions of understanding what forgiveness is, it's not saying that what happened to you is okay. I think that's the big thing that so many of us hold on to that pain because we're afraid once we let that go, we're going to say, it's okay what you did to us. And so that's what I really help people understand is it has nothing to do with that person because when you're still holding on to their pain and their shame that they put on you, then you're walking around with that and they still have power over you. So again, it's literally forgiving for giving that pain back to that person and forgetting for getting your power back. And so in that moment when you find your freedom and you find gratitude in it and you say thank you for that, understanding what that is, then you can really start to maybe get excited about it because it's like, oh, it really has nothing to do with them. I'm not excusing their behavior. I'm not saying I forgive you. Now you're welcome back to my life. That's the other misconception is that because you forgive someone, it does not mean they get to come back in your life. You get to decide. And so I have a lot of people in my life that have hurt me, and I get to decide some of them I'll never see again, just like my perpetrator when I was 4. I forgive him, but I don't need him in my life. Then there's other people, maybe family, loved ones, friends that have hurt us, and you can forgive, but maybe you have a little bit of a boundary up, and maybe they're a little bit further distance than they were before. That's where you get to decide is the forgiveness is about you and what feels right to you.
Uh-huh. I totally get that, and it's lovely. And what I am hearing is that forgiveness is not about bypassing the truth. It's more about honoring it or, while choosing not to remain bound to it. Because you're not bound to let people come in again, but then for yourself, you can just honor it and be like, okay, I acknowledge this and I'd probably just let it go. So yeah, that is what I take away from this.
Yes, and the bypassing is so important because in the spiritual community, you'll find that a lot, that it's easy to spiritually bypass something by saying, it's okay, I know better. I went through that a lot. I am all about love and light in my life and my work. And so I had to really understand what anger was. And it's okay to feel angry. That's okay to feel angry. And that's that thing of forgiveness doesn't say, okay, it's all perfect and you're not going to be upset. What it is again that process of getting it back, understanding what happened, seeing the gratitude in it that it happened for you, not to you. And that is that big perspective shift. When you start seeing these things that happen in your life for you, you're going to find gratitude for them. And sometimes it's just about thanking you for showing me who I choose not to be. It can be as simple as that. And so I really, really think that that bypassing is important to understand it, but to really feel the pain. We're not saying we're going to forgive and then just life is great. We're just saying we're going to allow ourselves to truly feel the pain, but then also move through the pain.
Hmm. Totally understand that. And let's stay with that for a moment. I want to know, why do you think forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, can feel so difficult? And what deeper emotional or spiritual patterns tend to keep people stuck and blocked in the same place?
I think it's that fear of getting stuck in the pain, stuck in the wound. And so if it's easier, I have a lot of clients that come to me and say, "Yes, my dad abused me when I was younger, but he loves me." And so immediately they're dismissing what happened to them. And so what I really try to do is go back to that inner child, that little child, that they don't understand that in the moment. Maybe that 4-year-old self of mine did not understand what was happening to her. She didn't see it happening for her. So now I understand that, but I have to go back and I have to honor that little girl's pain. And so that's what happens sometimes is knowing how to move through it and not get stuck in it and to truly understand that just because you it happened, it doesn't mean you have to get stuck in the pain, and it's a very fine line of honoring it and saying it, but then moving through it, and so my forgiveness method, it kinda works up your chakras, and it starts with the root, which is safety, and I'm a big believer, and you have to have a container of safety in order to speak your truth and to name the wound. That is the most important thing, is to name it, but without minimizing it and just naming it without a bunch of emotions. I can now say I was molested. It took me a long time to get there. I've had miscarriages. I've had things like that. Gone through a divorce. I can say those things and they don't own me anymore. They're a part of my story, but they're not my story.
It takes such a strong approach for that. And I feel it starts simple. It starts with acknowledging yourself. It starts with naming yourself as a human too, right? And it might feel difficult, but then as you start on, piling it up for the little things even people do, and then you don't forgive them for that hate or that it piles up, right? And then it becomes a whole pile of so much that then it feels difficult to, start. And it sounds like so much resistance to forgiveness is rooted in protection. As you said, that there is so much fear instilled in people, and parts of us that learned to survive by holding on onto those fears, onto those, moments, and making that our whole personality. And thank you for reframing that for us and for our listeners. And I hope the listeners also resonate with that.
It's such a beautiful thing just to hear that reflected back that yes, we have the power, but I also want to say forgiveness really, really, if someone's struggling with forgiveness of another, sometimes we have to look at the forgiveness of ourselves. And that seems to actually be the hardest one to do, is that I found is to forgive yourself. And so when people are having a hard time forgiving others or looking past that, that just usually means there's something within ourselves. Like you said, that it comes from a fear of protection. And so really trying to look at that and give that unconditional love to yourself first.
So true, so true. I totally agree with that. And now I want to know, how does unresolved forgiveness show up in everyday life? As we were talking about forgiveness and the pile that I mentioned, how is that showing up in our everyday lives and perhaps to our body, in relationships, or in how someone, relates to themselves? And it is not necessarily that the relationship with that individual who, you know whom you forgive, but then uh with yourself also sometimes, and with other people. And there is so much that happens, as you mentioned, that there are so many childhood traumas that people have, and that also piles up. And how are all of those things showing up in everyday life, and a lot of us, we don't realize it.
I think the first word that came to my mind when you said that was victim, was a victim. Because again, I can easily say that I was a victim of molestation. And sometimes I might use that language, but really when I sit there and think about it, again, I can truly say everything in my life happened for me, not to me. And so I don't have that victim mentality. And so what happens is a lot of times when we sit in the anger and we sit in it, it gives us a permission slip to act kind of bad. Now, I've learned that there's two things we either do inside, we hurt ourselves or we hurt others with that pain. Where does that pain go? And we usually bury it down inside and we're going to hurt ourselves, or we explode it out and we hurt others. And so that pain is so important to honor and process. So for me, going through mine, when I get in a place of anger and someone's really, really, really hurt me, I come in my meditation room and I meditate. Someone's I'll literally scream on the floor and I will cry. You get it out somatically. And so I'm not doing it to anyone else. It's in the confines of a safety environment, but something that feels good to me because I'm not one that easily can act mean or outwardly, but sometimes people can. And so I just try to tell them to create a space where you can let that out without hurting anybody else. And then the most important is to let it out without hurting yourself, to not drink, to not use drugs, to not numb, to not check out, to really just fully feel the pain. And I promise you, when you start fully feeling it, it will move through you.
That is beautiful, and I love that approach. And it's something powerful. There is something so much powerful in recognizing that what we don't forgive often continues to speak through tension patterns and exhaustion. And in so many ways, it is going to affect our everyday life. And we just think that, okay, I've worked too much today. And yes, that might be the reason for your exhaustion, but there is so much other, emotional exhaustion, which also takes place, and we often ignore it with, okay, I'll just sleep and that would all get better.
Yes. Yeah, distraction is such an easy one to do for anything in our life, but especially that and that bypassing of anger of it's okay, it's okay. And before you know it, it's not okay. And so those are those things you were saying of not letting it build up and get to that point and just being aware, but really, really starting to go all the way back to your childhood. That's why I found almost all my clients. It's all inner child work at some point, even and they say, "No, I'm good. I had a great childhood." There's always something there that happened to us that we hold on to with resentment.
That is so, so true. And what I feel is that forgiveness is not linear, and old feelings can resurface unexpectedly in any situation. There can be a slightest of trigger, or any stimuli can, just trigger you again. So, what helps someone return to forgiveness without judgment when this situation happens? Because again, they're humans, and you can't totally forget or forgive everything. So, yeah, how is that?
I think being curious, I'm a huge believer of curiosity. I always joke we have a saying here, curiosity killed the cat. And I'm always like, curiosity would set the kitty free. Where it's like, what I've learned is curiosity, being curious, why is this happening to me? Because so many times it's like, poor me, but really trying to get to the understanding. Because first there's a knowing, it's like that. I knew what happened to me. But once I got to a place of understanding why and that higher perspective, that oversoul, it was so much easier to process that to see it was done for me. And again, that gratitude of it, of being able to look at something and understand it. It's like taking a test and you don't get it, it's in a different language. It's probably not going to be the best test. But if you at least know the answers, you know why, then you have a chance of passing it. And so that's what I help people with is kind of telling the answers, the reasons why, the understanding of forgiveness, why it's so important. And then they can go apply it into their everyday life or if their boss, they get fired at work, maybe that's a resentment, something easy they can get angry at instead of looking at it as thank you for setting me free because you don't know what's on the other side. You don't know what's on that other side of the door. And so sometimes I truly believe we're guided throughout our life. And so we just have to trust you're being guided in the right way. So if you get fired from something and you know it had nothing to do with you and you were the best worker and everything you did, then maybe it's just that. It has nothing to do with you. It can have something to do with your job, financial. And so we make it all about us a lot. And so it's just stopping to see that not everything and not everyone's behaviors are really about us. Almost always they're about the other person. And I always say, hurt people. And it's just as simple as that.
So true, so true. And I love how compassionate that feels. And it feels so, so much important, that forgiveness. It isn't a one time act, is what I have to add upon. And but it is surely an ongoing relationship with ourselves. And yes, you can always come back and forgive yourself and others as well in the same process. And for anyone who is listening who feels heavy with resentment or regret, listeners, I have a question for you to introspect. What if forgiveness is not about being ready, but about being willing to take one gentle step towards relief? And we've talked about this today. So I hope you're paying attention and you're actually taking up insights that Shannon is sharing with us today. And what I take away from Shannon is that forgiveness is a sacred art of choosing freedom again and again by releasing what no longer needs to live in your heart, and it's not for anybody else but for yourself. And Shannon, for listeners who feel drawn to your healing book or your book, where can they connect with you and explore more about your work?
Yeah, so everything that they would be looking for, they can find on my website, www.angelgoddesshealing.com, and they can schedule a free healing consultation. I always tell people if anyone's listening to that and something resonates, to please, please reach out. And if it's not me, I will help you get in contact with someone. I have a lot of people that work with me and work for me. And so I always want to find the best match, whether it's me or somebody else. And so just to anything you hear, just to reach out.
Thank you for that. And listeners, you reach out to her. And yeah, thank you for sharing this sacred space with us on Sacred Harmony today. May today's conversation work for you permission to soften, to release, and to meet yourself with kindness where it matters most. Until next time, may your heart feel at least a little lighter and your path a little more peaceful. I am Pragya Malvia, your host, signing out. And thank you for being on the show.